What's up, Funkers? We're back. This is episode number 4 of What the Funk, and one that I've been really excited about for a long time. First off, we have Chase Nall with us, who's going to be one of my rotating co-hosts. Chase absolutely knocked it out of the park with Tripping Over the Barrel when he came on with me and Tim. Has a lot of insight, recommended a great book that I've been reading over the past few months. And Chris Dinkler, one of my kind of early career mentors, somebody who I consider one of the best salespeople that I've ever come across. And he also worked with Chase back when Enverus was drilling info and mentored him, I think, a little bit as well. So there's a lot of synergies to this discussion. And Chris, truly, you are a sterling guest.
Well, it's good to be here. Thanks for asking me to come on, Jeremy.
Yeah, man, you're going to crush it. So we'll just jump right into this. Chris, today, from a business perspective, you're the chief revenue officer at Enverus, which is a pretty massive company, maybe the biggest energy tech company in the world at this point. So I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to meet with us. You're trying to meet all your revenue goals for year end and all that bullshit that I don't have to think about anymore, thank God, as a consultant. But nonetheless, I want to get to know who you are. You've got kind of a fascinating past. You have a lot of very different interests. So talk about kind of your roots. I think you grew up a Kansas kid. You might have played basketball in college and then have built a pretty strong career as a sales guy and then as an executive in oil and gas. So talk to us a little bit about who is Chris Dinkler.
Well, yeah, boy, that's I don't know how interesting that really is, but I appreciate the question. I actually was a Nebraska kid. So I grew up in South Central Nebraska on a farm and a really small town. My graduating class was like 26 people, I think, or something.
Wow.
So it was pretty small. And then I went to college in Sterling, Kansas, which is, I think, what you had referenced, and had the opportunity to play basketball there. And that's where I met my wife. And we've now been married for 28 years. And so it's where I got introduced into oil and gas. I also got introduced into sales during that time. I actually sold Cutco knives to help pay my way through college.
Did you?
I did. And so very few people know that. And so you had to, cut my teeth on selling knives door to door when I was in college, but graduated with an accounting and finance degree, and then worked for a small operator in Kansas called Carmen Schmidt Inc. And it was a small operator, stripper well production in Northwest Kansas, and learned a lot about oil and gas, about energy. And actually, it's where I got started in technology. We developed some using Microsoft Access, and was pretty naive when we started, but developed the daily drilling and daily production and allocation system, and even some ERP accounting, joint interest billing, revenue distribution. That's what actually brought me down to Houston, and was pretty naive when we did it. And that was in the late 90s, and learned a lot. And I don't think I ever really appreciated how close we were to not being able to pay our bills and to do that. But that's where I got my start. And again, it was great, and actually started in support and operations in that. And then we were struggling, and I took a trip back to Kansas and met with some of our partners that we had dealt with in the operative world, and came back with several contracts. And they said, "You're our new director of sales." And so that's what kind of launched my sales career. So kind of school of hard knocks, if you will.
Well, gee whiz, Chris, I didn't know all that.
That's you're referencing, boy, you're referencing some old days there.
I had to. So Chase, before you jump in, I do want to preface this a little bit. I met Chris in very early 2008. I knew nothing about oil and gas at the time, but I did have about 5 years of sales experience in selling technology. But oil and gas was brand new to me. And Chris, I think my first day on the job, oil was like $138 a barrel, like literally all-time highs. And you were closing deals right and left. Mac was closing deals. I'd make 10 phone calls in a day and get 3 demos set up. Things were really, really good. And then they really, really changed fast. But you were like the legend. People were like, look, you get the deal to Chris Dinkler and he's going to close it.
Oh, come on. I don't know about that.
But
But I
you were
did.
crushing it.
Yeah. Those are the days. And, it was kind of funny to think about oil and gas. When I first got in the industry, and I worked for that small operator, I remember oil was like $18, $19 a barrel. And that was late 90s. And you don't really, at the time, I remember when I think it got up into the 20s, and I thought, man, we are crushing it right now. Cause I didn't have any perspective.
Yep.
Yeah.
I didn't have any context of what that meant. And I was so, new into that space. And now, and it was obviously very conventional vertical wells, stripper wells. So, there wasn't a lot of the costs, and the break evens were certainly different than a lot of our unconventional wells that we see. But yeah, you come into those times where it's over $100 or things change, and I certainly have much more appreciation now for some of those, the heyday that we were in that time.
Chris, one question on that. So, little context as well. I met Chris and when did you join at the time Drilling Info? What year was that?
That was 2015.
Okay, so I met you in 2015, and we worked together, I guess, for 3 or 4 years until I left. But when you joined Drilling Info, now Enverus, but what was your role at the time?
I was SVP of North American Sales.
Okay, and then you went through multiple sales leadership roles, and then the Oil Decks acquisition, you were GM of that business unit for a while. And then I left when you were doing that. And then, I think you had a couple more positions, but I'd love to just unpack a little bit as you've grown your career at now Enverus from, really in the trenches with, a team trying to land some of these deals all the way through kind of GM and now into CRO. How have you seen your perspective change, or the things you focus on change? Because it's so interesting. I have this window of time where we were really close and working together, almost 10 years ago. And then kind of fast forward to today, you and I have professionally been out of touch for a while. So I'd love to hear kind of your perspective on that trajectory.
That's an interesting question. It kind of, somebody asked me that before, as far as advice for sales leaders and people, really trying to, continue on in their career progression. And I think my perspective has changed from, early on as a sales leader, you're sitting in the quarter and you're trying to make your numbers, and you're looking this far in front of you.
Mm.
And I think, I spent a lot of time working on acquisition and acquisition integration at Enverus. And so it changed from really sales leader more to, looking at, as from a GM, looking at all of it, looking at not just sales, but looking at product and development and marketing. And really, you act as almost a mini CEO in our model here at Enverus when you GM. And it really changed to more strategy and long-term outlook. And most importantly, I would say the people. And so that's probably the biggest takeaway, was that I would even say that over the last 5 to 6 years, that perspective changed. Because if it all is about the coaching, and it really is your number one asset is the people. And so you can create more tech, you can constantly innovate, you're going to lose customers, you're going to gain customers. But if you don't have an engaged group of team members around you, it really doesn't matter. None of the rest of it matters. And so I think that's always the balance that you have to keep, and how it's shifted, really.
Mm-hmm.
Quarters, you're going to make a few quarters, you're going to hopefully make more quarters than you miss. But without a solid team around you, none of that's going to happen.
And one additional follow-up there, this is going to be a little bit of a nuanced question, but as you've shifted from more of the kind of tactical, to your point, focused on the quarter in front of you, shifting to focusing on the people, but really focusing more strategy, more long-term, are there any, I don't know the right word here, any systems or processes or best practices you use to think on a longer time horizon? Like how have you made that shift? And how do you make sure that you're keeping your eye on the right time horizon?
That's a great question. It is all about the strategy, and it's about making sure that the team understands the why behind the strategy, and why are we doing this, and how is it actually going to get us to our goals. But most importantly, actually, what I found, what drives that, are the conversations with the customers.
Mm.
So ultimately being having a very pragmatic process where we are engaged with our customers first and foremost, and really understanding what are they telling us? How is the market moving? Trying to get in front of that to be able to ask our customers really leading questions. What if you were able to do it this way, or that way? Really challenging their thinking. That begins to form up our strategy. Enverus is, I believe, strongly is one of the most innovative companies in energy high tech today.
No doubt.
In large part because of our product team and our account managers and directors and our intelligence team staying out in front of the market, being able to see what's changing and how it's changing. That actually then starts to create and form our strategy, which drives our financial goals and outcomes. And we're then able to cascade that down to our team so they understand, our developers want to know that they're building something that's going to be used and used from a customer perspective that's valuable and helps them. That's what motivates them and gets them out of bed. That when they're developing something, it's really making a difference in the industry. We had a great acquisition recently, Rated Power. They're out of Madrid, and it is all around solar project design.
Hmm.
That team and just seeing really that strategy is all around our energy transition and power renewable strategy with Enverus. But I'm telling you, it is so dovetailed into the broader global strategy around energy transition. And so those things really tie nicely, and seeing how all that cascades it's super invigorating, and really creates a lot of excitement when you get out of bed. Why do we do what we do?
So speaking of bed, right? How do you sleep? Like, I wonder this of anybody who's the chief revenue officer, chief executive officer of a company that has substantial revenue goals. And it sort of must feel like, at least I'm projecting a little bit, like when you're an individual contributor, you've got your number, but when you hit your number, you're kind of like, well, I did my job, right? For you, if you hit your number, then you know that things are just going to be like, well, you still have some people that are below goal and you have to get those people up. It's never really enough. So, how are you able to balance like taking a break from work and still being a dad? I know that you're a family man and you have other interests, but like, how do you do it? Because it's something
Well,
I've struggled with personally.
I think that's a great question, Jeremy, and I think we could talk an hour just about that. My wife tells me I sleep well, and I must be dreaming of motorcycles by the amount of swimming that I do. But I do. I wake up and I think about, my mind is constantly racing. But I would say that you got to enjoy what you do. Otherwise, to run at the pace that we all run at, and it's not just me. I'd say everybody works harder now today than we've ever worked. And
Sure.
I think in this society, even from a COVID standpoint, we're now in a work from home where we go from meeting to meeting to meeting, and there's very little downtime. And so I think you've got to be able to balance those things in life. And it's a challenge for me, just like it's a challenge for everybody else. But for me, I actually really love what I do. And
Mm.
so I love thinking about, right now I'm thinking about 2024,
Wow.
not 2023. And are we doing the right things today from a prioritization from what we're developing, what we're innovating in various segments? Because we have in various, we cover not just oil and gas. We cover financial services and midstream and oil field services, minerals, and we deal with hedge funds and investment banks. And so making sure that we're doing the types of things that we need to do for each of those segments is what invigorates me. That is fun. I think trying to find that balance though is really important, because if you don't, you'll find yourself burned out. And I do,
Mm.
from time to time, I kind of like, wow, um, we've been going pretty hard, and so sometimes you got to check out. But having Chase, I don't know if you know, I'm a grandpa now, so
What?
Whoa.
uh,
Congrats.
yeah,
Whoa.
9 months old. His name's Holden, and so Jeremy, to your question, having your first grandson is a really good way to check you out. You don't think about work. You're actually just, I'm pops, so to him. So anyway, that's an interesting way to be able to do that, and it helps ground you pretty quickly on your why, on why we do what we do, and family is so important.
Absolutely. So you mentioned motorcycling, but I want to talk about flying planes. Did you ever go fully through with that and actually fly aircraft?
I did. So when I got my, gosh, this was, I think I can't remember when you left P2, but I remember getting my private pilot's license back in, I think it was 2010. And I got that. And then when I left to go to oil decks, I took a couple months off and to just kind of recharge. And I went and got my instrument rating in like 2 or 3 months. Just I was flying in the morning, flying in the afternoon. I was doing classes during the day, and that was fun. And so I tell people, you talk about checking out. When you're going down the runway, and you're full throttle, you're not thinking about your quarter. You want your takeoffs for landings. And so, but it is invigorating. It's such a thrill. I'm not flying as much as I used to. I don't think I've flown in 2 or 3 years. So if I ask you to go flying with me, the answer should probably be no.
Chris, and I think we've talked about this in the past. My dad was a Marine Corps pilot and owns a little experimental plane. Ironically, I bought a snowmobile, and my dad asked me, "Hey, what kind of engine's in that snowmobile?" Why would you ask me that? Oh, my plane runs on a snowmobile engine, which I had no idea.
Wow.
And so, my dad's like out in the middle of Briggs, Texas, flying this little experimental prop plane with a snowmobile engine. Rotex 503 is the engine. But anyway, when you go flying, obviously it's been a few years. But what kind of aircraft are you taking up?
It's usually a Cessna 172. I had a Piper or two that I bought, and actually, and that's a Cessna 172 is a high wing. Piper is a low wing, and but I sold that probably 4 years ago, and I haven't really, I haven't flown much since. Motorcycling is definitely do a lot more of that. So
you're a Harley guy, right?
I am. I love. Julie and I will take off and we'll go on some road trips, and we've been all over the country. And I'm one to trailer it there. I'm not one to punish myself on hours and hours on the highway. But once we get there, we'll definitely ride in the mountains or the wherever we're at.
All right. So, sorry, Funk. Follow-up question. I'd love to know this. So I'm asking for selfish reasons. My father-in-law is also a big Harley guy, but he's also that guy that if he's driving down the highway and he sees a bike in a garage, he'll stop and knock on the door and ask, if they want to sell and how much they want to sell it for. And he has this amazing knack of taking old bikes, fixing them and flipping them. He's been trying for years to give me a bike, and I'm terrified of motorcycles. They scare me. I'd scare the daylights out of me. So what would be your advice to somebody who is in my position? It's like you could get your hands on a bike if you wanted, but it's a little intimidating. Like what would be your guidance to me?
First of all, if he's giving it to you, say yes, and be grateful. Secondly, go take a motorcycle safety course. And I did, and I actually rode growing up, but I think you have to do that now even, but it's actually, incredibly helpful. And so a lot of the things that they teach you in that is just, you think it's common sense. It's not, just like your eyes, you will go where your eyes are looking. And that's normally where people get in trouble around curves, is they're looking right in front of them, not where they're going. And all of a sudden they find themselves drifting. Little things like that. So go take your motorcycle safety course. It's on a small bike, and you're going to be really hard pressed it's usually in a parking lot, like a big ground or something. You can't really screw that up. And then you'll leave knowing whether or not you want to do it or not. So my wife did that. Actually, she went and did the motorcycle safety course just to do it. And then she left, and then she wanted a bike. So we actually bought her a little Kawasaki Vulcan, but we sold it because she just wasn't riding it enough. But yeah, that would be my advice for you.
Cool. Thank you.
Do you take your bike out on those crazy highways in Houston?
Hell no.
I was going to say, man.
That's the other advice is, stay away from doing stupid stuff. And so it doesn't mean that anything can happen at any time. And so I think you just have to be grateful for every day. And every day, it really is a gift. And especially as we went through COVID, right? So many people lost loved ones, and you just went through a health scare, right, Jeremy? And so every day is a gift. And so I think but you can choose to minimize your risk. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a couple things here. One, because we were talking about flying
Oh,
planes
look
and
at
fighter pilots. There's Ted Williams, the greatest American of all time. Hall of Fame baseball player, Hall of Fame fisherman, and also potentially considered the greatest fighter pilot of all time. I'm not
that.
sure if you
Really?
guys realize that. Yeah, he
Really?
missed 4 years playing baseball because he was fighting in the Korean War and was like notoriously one of the best fighter pilots that there ever was.
I didn't
Yeah.
know that. My grandfather was in the Korean War. Yeah, that's great.
No kidding. Yeah, 42 to 46 or something like that. 42 to 46. And then he came back and hit 400 because he's Ted Williams and that's what he does. But Chris, to bring it back to me, because this is my podcast, it's all about
It's all about you, Jeremy. That's right.
One of the things that I credit you with, and I've tried to pass this on to salespeople who I've mentored, is you were the first sales manager I had who really taught me how to be creative and independent as a salesperson. I think when a lot of people think of sales manager, they think of hands-on micromanagement. I felt like you were actually the opposite of that and really empowered me to do creative business deals within reason, but to be able to make somebody feel good about the deal that they did in a creative way, whether that be pricing or payment terms or features or something that would cultivate a longer term relationship with the customer. You did a lot for me to help think creatively, and that's something I've carried throughout my career. How do you balance the ability to allow your team to be creative while still being a part of a massive corporate engine now that does, $500 million a year in revenue?
That's a great question, because that's actually some of the biggest advice I give to some folks, is, you got to think, don't lose your entrepreneurial spirit.
Yep.
Regardless of, the size of the organization that you're in. And it's a challenge. You're right. You're exactly right, Jeremy. The larger the organization, that becomes a bigger challenge. We've had to incorporate things, and we're just incorporating some, we call it a deal desk, but it's not a deal prevention desk. It's really more to help our reps get creative around that, because I think some of the challenge is, we'll bring a new rep and they don't necessarily know me as well as maybe you two know me. And they think that they have to operate within a very strict guideline.
Sure.
But I think, it goes back to really what we want to do. And what I would tell anybody in this profession is know your customer and know what your customer is trying to solve, not what you're trying to solve. And then if you know that, I very rarely, you've probably remember hearing me say some of this, depending on how good your memory is, there's very few deals or very few problems that we can't solve to get creative around to make sure it works for the customer. Because ultimately, this is about the customer. And it's actually one of our core values. We used to call it customers for life. And now it's really, we changed it partners for life, because our customers are our partners, and making sure that they feel like we're truly partnering with them. But that's got to extend down to how our sales professionals are engaging with our customers as well. And if we do that well, that works very, very well. And so, but you're right. It is harder. And I think that comes down to building leaders, which is one of the main tenets. And one of my main passions is really building leaders on top of leaders on top of leaders. And it's all around how good our sales leaders are at coaching our team to be able to think that way, to engage that way, always with a customer centric mindset. Because really and this sounds idealistic, but it's true. We're here to serve our sales team, and our sales team is their primary role is to serve our customers. It's not the other way around. And so if they're serving our customers, they should have that mindset. And we do that naturally when we start a company, right? I mean, if you think about when we start a company and you're getting it off the ground, everybody is highly focused on engaging and doing, getting really creative for the customer. You have to create more boundaries as you scale. Otherwise, you can't scale.
Mm-hmm.
You've got one-off code or one-off, code sets you can't necessarily do that for the customers, but you can get creative in how you structure commercial terms and things like that to make sure it's fit for purpose for the customer. It's a really good question, and one that I think every organization is always challenged with.
And it changes, right? Depending on organizational size, it can depend on market factors, right? You referenced COVID, and I can't imagine the pressures that you were under when you're selling to companies who are dealing with negative oil prices, right? Like that was something where I'm like, well, I'm not going to hit my number. Like, because if I'm here to serve the client, how can I tell them that they need to buy new accounting software when they're just trying to keep the lights on? Like, if you can enter the data somewhere, keep doing that, and we'll start talking when things come back.
Well, I think what we had to do too during that time is really, you rethink, you reimagine. You have to get really creative with contract terms. We partnered with our customers in many areas, like whether it's price increases. Now our customers are giving us more price increase now because several of them even said, "Yeah, you're right. For the last 2 years, you've really partnered. In some cases, reduced. In some cases, depending on the situations, they were all different, right?" And so we didn't take a one size fits all approach. But we also had to change how we were engaging our customers with the solution sets. And I would say that that's held true now. If you look at 2019 versus today, it's all about efficiency, especially in energy. The public markets have shifted. It's all about free cash flow, strength of balance sheet, return to shareholders. 2019 is, drill, 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 replacing production. How we're actually engaging our customers with the solution sets and what we're innovating, that changed. So how we're actually innovating to make sure that we're able to allow customers to continue to gain efficiencies is primarily how we're engaging with our customers. And that was pretty much true for even a lot of our competitors. That was not true in 2018 and 2019. And so you've got to be willing to adapt, and you've got to be willing to not just change your sales process, but change your product roadmap to change, what you're building and how you're innovating.
One thing that you haven't mentioned, we're almost 27 minutes in, and I love pointing this out when we have great sales leaders, is you haven't once mentioned competition, but you've mentioned customers like 50 times. And this is like a core tenet of Jeff Bezos and Amazon, that you'd never focus on competition, because if you focus on just being slightly better than your competition, that's all you're ever going to be.
I agree.
If you focus on delivering value to your customers and listening to your customers, then you will always be best of breed and a customer-centric organization. Everything Amazon has done over the years has been that focus. So I think it's really important, especially for the younger salespeople that are listening to this podcast, to hear how people like Chris talk, to hear how people like Chase and Matt Wilcoxon, when he came on, talk about their customer-centric approach, because it's not just lip service. If you focus on your competition, you'll lose in the long run, because somebody will eventually come along and focus on what the customers actually want. So I just wanted to kind of point that out to everyone, because to me, it's a very vital part of how the better sales leaders and better companies operate.
Go ahead,
Chris. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I couldn't agree more. I think internally, we don't talk hardly at all. I got a question, I think, from I was on a call with a financial institution, and they asked me what I thought about the competition. And I actually had to stop and think. And I said, well, we're aware of the competition, and there's always going to be there's going to be new startups that are always starting, and there's going to be, and I actually like it because it actually drives innovation. It holds us accountable. But essentially we're getting that from our customers. Our customers are actually having that conversation with us about what they're trying to solve, their strategic initiatives, how they're aligning with the board of directors. What are the most important things that are important to that customer in the market, and how the market's shifting? And if you're focused on that, I think good things are going to happen. So I'm just, I guess, reaffirming what you're saying.
So Chris, one thing as I was taking notes this morning, thinking about stuff I wanted to bring up, one of the things that I was thinking about is, if you're I've been in professional sales for almost 20 years. I'm in a sales leadership position at this point. But if I look back at all the people I've been in the trenches with, people I've learned from, people that have mentored me, a couple names obviously pop up, right? There's Carl Scheibel, Matt Wilcoxon, Brandon Taylor, Chris Dinkler, Jeff Hughes, Colin Westmoreland, right? Like, and I bring up all those names just to say that, Chris, for many years, you and I were kind of being taught by the same school. Where you are today in your career, where you are with the size of your team, if you were talking to someone who's brand new to sales, someone who a couple years in, they're learning, what would be books, articles, resources, lessons? Like, what would be the artifacts you would say, hey, if you want to really hone your craft, go study these things? What would those things be?
That's a great question. It's one that's happening right now. I'm so fortunate that I got an incredible family. Like I would just, man, I've got 4 amazing kids. Two of those are in kind of following in a little bit of our same footsteps. One's in marketing, in a great role at Mitra Tech, working for an amazing leader in Ashley Estelet. And then another one, Braden, my youngest son, is actually working for a ERP provider they used to compete against. And so I
Quorum.
yeah,
Sorry.
he's working for Quorum, and they're a great company, and they're doing
Yeah.
things. And so I get to have these same conversations, actually, Chase, with him. And I would tell one of a piece of advice I would give, and I don't lose yourself in it. Like I was so focused on winning.
Yep.
That's all. We're so competitive, and you want salespeople that are competitive, but I would say sometimes you can lose yourself, and you lose that balance that we were talking about early.
And we've all done it too.
And especially if you have a young family. And I would say there's times I look back and I almost am saddened because I remember more about my work life than I did some of my personal life. And it's actually, I'm like, man, that's a miss. And I've had you brought up Jeff Hughes. When I came to Enverus, which was drilling info at the time in 2015, Jeff had came on a year later. I didn't realize how much I had yet to learn. And Jeff is really probably the best leader I've ever, by far, had a chance to work for. And a lot of what I know and my core tenets and my belief structures, and we've become kind of private equity athletes, really, in our careers, really has come from Jeff. And he's just such a remarkable leader. Young sales reps often think they have everything figured out.
Yeah.
And I would say have a mindset of learning constantly. And I see it all the time that the reps that are the most coachable, and Chase, you probably remember this. You remember that book we all had, back in the day? It was Humble, Hardworking, Smart, the Ideal Team, right?
Yep.
And that was a Carl Scheibel, Carl, man, God rest his soul. I mean, what a tragic accident that we lost Carl. But I think it is true. I mean, I do believe it's true. And I was having this same conversation with a couple of new reps. I'm like, man, you be humble, be the hardest working person, and really focus on your smarts. And if you really feel like you're struggling from that, like you don't get it, ask for help.
Yep.
I would say I'm going to end with like this one thing. Don't be afraid to raise your hand and say, I don't know. Some of the new sales reps think I've got to come in and I've got to prove that I've got this QBP nailed. I've got this account plan nailed. I've got my pipeline is perfect. It's never. The reps that I've seen that do the best are the ones that early on are raising their hand and they say, I don't know where to start, but I want to know. And if they have that mindset of being coachable, man, typically we see their productivity just take off really up and to the right because they're inquisitive, and that curiousness actually extends over to their engagement with their customer. So shocker, they're asking more questions. Even they're asking questions internally, and that actually bleeds over to how they engage with their customers. And their customers want somebody that's curious. They want to know about that. So those two things, I think, just be curious, be humble, be hardworking, be smart, and it's okay to say, I don't know.
Do you remember, Dinkler, do you remember Brandon Willen?
Oh, I do. Boy, that's a name from the past. Yeah.
Oh, man, I was talking to Willen the other day. So just for a little context for all the listeners, Brandon Willen was a gentleman who worked with us at Drilling Info before it was Enverus. And prior to joining, doing kind of oil and gas tech sales, he was a chicken farmer. He owned a chicken farm, and he raised chickens for eggs and meat.
I didn't know.
And he was the hardest working dude. The chicken farm didn't go the way he had planned. I think he and his partner had a disagreement in terms of kind of what the future of the farm looked like. And he called me up and said, hey, I'm thinking about getting into tech. I'd love to buy you lunch and just pick your brain. And I said, no, you're not going to buy me lunch. I'm going to interview you. Like, you need to come in. And that dude was the hardest working, most humble, asked the most questions. He's running his own business today. But I use that example all the time to people is I say, well, how do you be successful? And I said, man, if you can take a chicken farmer and turn him into a really successful, sales leader, he ran a global SDR team and just absolutely crushed it. Then, those are the core tenets. And I think you're dead on there, because those are really the three things that if you keep those tenets forefront in your mind, you're going to have a growth mindset and a growth career. So I couldn't agree more with that. Shout out to Brandon Willen.
You can coach the rest of it, but you can't coach some of those things that we talked about. Either they have that or they don't. Tell Brandon hi when you see him.
I will. I still talk to him.
Very fond memories. He's actually, one of the best I've seen coming out of that. You're right. Super humble, super hardworking, and just crazy smart.
Yeah. I mean, simply put, you can teach skill, but you can't teach will. Right. And that's a very succinct way to put it. I want to talk about a memory I have also. In 2012, I was working for Energy Navigator. And Chris, I think at the time you were Oildex.
Yeah, would have been early, because I think I was at Oildex for 2.5 years, I think, and helping them kind of recapitalize and I think that's right.
Revitalize. And I was at NAPE and I just lost a deal. I'll never forget this one. It was an AFE Navigator deal, AFE workflow, that ultra petroleum, and I lost to Quorum. And it was the wrong decision for them. Still eats away at me a little bit, but there's nothing I can really do about it now. And I was so bummed. And this happened literally, I found out like this is when you couldn't get Wi-Fi on planes, or at least the plane I was on didn't have Wi-Fi yet. So I land to this news in an email, and it caught me off guard because we've been talking pricing and I really thought I had this deal. And you could tell that the guy who passed the message on wasn't particularly happy about it either, but this was the group consensus. They wanted to go with a different AFE system. And I was just bumming. I didn't want to leave my hotel room, even though this is my biggest event of the year for generating new leads and opportunities. And I was like, man, I'm going to need to go find Chris. And I found you and sought you out. And you said a few words that still stuck with me. And I was bumming and I was kind of regurgitating the deal, and you were listening and smiling. And you said, and I was just saying, I can't believe I lost. Like, I don't lose deals. I can't. And you said, listen, everyone loses deals, man. If you didn't lose deals, you'd be walking on water. And it's the same thing that I have to tell to a lot of the young CEOs or young sales executives that I work with that are used to winning and don't lose competitive deals very often, is like, you are going to lose deals, even deals that you shouldn't lose. And you're going to get blindsided and things are going to happen and it's not going to make sense. And eventually you're just going to realize, like, I'm just not going to win every single deal. That's just not the reality of it. But that really stuck with me. Not to say it's okay to lose, but you're going to lose. Like, Tom Brady loses games. Wow. Tom Brady lost an undefeated season. Yeah. Even the greatest winners lose. And that's how you learn.
I agree. And what you just said, I think, is the most important part of that is, and because those that know me, I am very competitive. I mean, our family is competitive. We had you'll find this amusing. We all play ping pong, and we had a Thanksgiving ping pong tournament, and there was other people over and everybody was involved in it. And we realized that's not the smartest thing to do, to invite friends over, because when it's just the Dinklers actually just going at it because we all hate to lose and everybody's kind of watching, they thought, this is nice. We're just watching the Dinklers play ping pong against each other, because like we hate losing. So we're a very competitive family. That said, what you just said, I think is what happens in the loss. Like, and it's what separates, and I think this is true not just for sales reps, but also for anybody in business and really in life. It's what happens in the loss. Mm-hmm. Learn. The great ones will actually learn from it. Look at, you mentioned Brady, and I've used this. Some of you might even remember me saying this, Jeremy, but it's about how fast we play, recover, and play. You're going to have a play that doesn't go your way. How fast you recover mentally, learn from that loss, and then set it aside and then re-engage with a positive mindset. That actually, what I've seen, my observation, separates the really high performers. And it's not just in sales, I think in product and development and marketing, from the ones that are average. And it's that learning. Nobody ever learns you might learn a little bit in the success, but it's really in those losses that we have a great opportunity to learn. And that might be not just in a sales engagement. That might be a promotion you're looking for. It
Yeah.
might be, I got some really tough feedback internally because my how was really not what it should have been. I showed up not on my A game, maybe said something I shouldn't have said,
Mhm.
maybe had a bit of a sharper tone than I should have had. And then all of a sudden I get some feedback. Am I going to learn right there? Am I going to apply to do better? Because none of us comes at it, like you said, perfectly. And so I like to ask, sometimes I'll ask folks, I'm like, tell me about your failures. And they say, well, I didn't have any. I'm like, well, then we're not trying hard enough.
Yep.
Because if we're
Yeah.
really pushing the envelope and we're trying, you're gonna fail, and you just will. And it's how we learn from that failure. And I think celebrating, I like kind of saying, celebrate your failures, learn from them, and share it.
Mm-hmm.
Share it with people. Jeremy, you probably remember. I forgot about this until you brought this up. But we talked. There was a great book that I read before, it was a long time ago, called Flawless Execution.
Oh, I remember that.
Now, you remember that?
Yeah.
And it was all about sharing our wins and sharing our losses and
Mm-hmm.
actually getting better and better and better and letting other people learn from that. But I think until we're vulnerable enough to be able to do that, it starts with the leader doing it. And then the rest will follow. Then the people under him or her, or whomever, will start to be more confident sharing that. So I think you have to create that culture. It's not easy to do, and I don't think we're there, even if I look at our own organization, but I think that's the desire and that's the ideal state.
Yeah, yes, and a mentor of mine used to call that the accumulation of points, and I never really understood what he meant. And he said, over a career, or even over like one role, your chances of winning are X, and hopefully, they're your chances of winning are higher than losing. But over time, as you pick up these little nuggets of wisdom, and you have those losses where you go, okay, what could I have done differently, and you incorporate that learning, you're accumulating points, right? And those points increase your chance of winning. And maybe over a career, you increase it by 10%, whatever, right? Just throwing out numbers here. But, imagine a 10% greater chance of winning a football game.
Mm.
Over time, it makes a meaningful difference. And so this mentor would always tell me, like, hey, just make sure you're gathering points, you're accumulating points. And I think going back to that growth mindset, you take those losses, you say, hey, what could I have done differently? And then if you're astute, you don't make that exact same mistake again. Maybe you make a different variation of that mistake,
Yeah.
but you don't make the same mistake. And then over time, it's like, oh, well, I've lost a deal myriad ways, but I didn't lose a deal the same way twice, right?
Yeah.
And over time, that really does increase your chances of winning overall.
Yeah. Well said, Chase. You bet.
That's really good. We got a couple more minutes here, and Chase, I want to bring you back to the fold. When you came on Tripping Over the Barrel,
Mm-hmm.
you had kind of what I considered like a dream job. You were working for an investment group, you were
Yeah.
advising various different startups, and then to my surprise, you took a job heading up kind of a startup group. What talk about your transition a little bit and what you're working on right now?
I will. I'm actually going to pull Dinkler into this, just because Dinkler and I had a really. There have been a couple points in my life where Dinkler's been really. By the way, I don't call him Chris. I call him Dinkler. If you
Yeah.
ever figured that
Everybody
out.
in Paris calls me Dinkler. I don't think
Yeah,
I have
he's
a name.
Dinkler. Like I Chris is always someone else. Anyway, there've been a few key moments in Dinkler and I's relationship that I still think back to. The first one, I won't tell the whole story, but the first real engagement Dinkler and I had was a disagreement. We were heated in my office in Austin over. I was running an SDR team at the time, and Dinkler thought I gave a lead that turned into a significant deal to the wrong team, and I was on the wrong side of Dinkler for that one. But anyway, I left. Again, at the time it was Drilling Info. I left Drilling Info in 2018, the end of 2018, in large part because I wanted to go somewhere smaller. And so I joined a tech company out of Austin and was there for a couple of years, left in February of 21, and moved to the Pacific Northwest. I'm in Seattle, Washington, for those of you who can see my background. And I joined a venture capital firm, and I was basically a fractional CRO for all of their 50 portfolio companies, and it was a dream job. It was, you learned a ton, you got to see a ton of companies, but Dinkler, pulled me aside and said, like, "Hey, man, you walked away from a really promising career here at Enverus. You were well positioned to go do some crazy things. Like, why'd you do that? And I bring that up because it was a really good question, and it really caused me to think about what I wanted. Um, and I still think about that conversation because maybe I did make a mistake by leaving Enverus Drilling Info at the time, maybe not, but what it ultimately did is it made me think about, what do you want to do when you grow up? What are you really passionate about, and what do you want to do? And while the venture capital firm was one of the best groups of people I've ever worked for, and I, full disclosure, work for a portfolio company of that venture capital firm today because I feel so strongly about that group of people. But what I really wanted to do was lead a sales organization. It's fun to be able to jump into these different companies and consult and advise. You get to experience some really fantastic context switching, but you don't get in the trenches with a group of people on a day in, day out basis. And that's what I really want to do. I love to see people grow in their career. I love to mentor people. I love to help them be successful. And so, yeah, I shifted over. I'm in the logistics industry now. I lead a team, and we help small independent trucking companies get paid quicker on their invoices and literally help them fuel their growth. And it's a really rewarding, fantastic organization in a really exciting market. I never thought I'd be in oil and gas. I never thought I'd be talking to truckers every day, but I love it, and I love my team. But it was that question from Dinkler of like, hey man, why'd you make that decision? That really made me think, where do I want to spend my time? Where do I want to invest my time? And you got to love what you do, to paraphrase Dinkler from earlier in this conversation. So hope that answers the question.
Oh man, that was great. How freaking good is this guy, Chris?
He's good. I tell you, I remember when Chase left, I was like, oh man. It was a punch in the gut. However, I say this to a lot of our leaders, ultimately, our job is to actually make sure that they land where they want to land in their career. And that may not be at Enverus. It might be our job is to actually prepare them for that. And then they land they're running sales somewhere else. I mean, look at Chase. And if that actually, brings me a lot of joy knowing that Chase is doing what he's doing right now, and that we were able to be a small part of it. And it's a small part because, Chase is a rock star. I mean, like he's one of the best I've worked with. And so it's fun to see. Chase, it's fun to see you doing what you're doing, man. I mean,
thanks, really, brother. You too.
So congrats.
Chris, back in your oil tank.
My boys are going to watch this, and then they're going to start. I won't be dad. It'll be, hey, Dinkler.
So. When you were at Oil Decks, you were trying to recruit me over there, and I remember wanting to do it because I really enjoyed working for you in the time that we had together at what was Bolo, WellPoint Systems, just before the whole P2 thing. And ironically, what kept me from joining you was what I saw you do at Bolo. Like I wanted to be the Chris Dinkler, but of a different company. And you're like, no, come over here. I'm like, no, but they're too far down the path. I want to do what you did.
We had to try.
Yeah, I know. You put the old college try out there, but it was sort of like I saw what you did, and ironically, that kept me from then working for you because I wanted to make that impact myself, right? So kudos to you, and also sorry because you were so good at what you did in those early days at Bolo. But
well, listen, man, I saw you go out and crush it. I mean, what you did at Seven Lakes and what you did. I mean, watching your engagements, I would hear about you when we would talk to customers, and it was fun actually watching you achieve what, I mean, in large part, I think that company's success was, Jeremy, there was no shortage of your impact on that company's success. And I think it's now at W Energy now. Yeah. And that's a huge part of their growth strategy from what I hear. And so
no question.
You ought to feel incredibly proud about that. But it was fun watching that. And it was fun watching, kind of seeing some of these press releases come out. And I remember seeing some that you engaged with Devin or something, kind of going back, and that was super fun to see you just go crush it in your career.
Thank you, Chris. And, I owe a lot of that to the mentors I had like you early on in my career. And unfortunately, people who were not like you that were the other side of the coin.
You got to learn from all of it, right? Sometimes you learn what to do and sometimes you learn what not to do. And so,
often the what not to do is more impactful than the what to do, right? It's like,
oh my God.
Oh man, I'm never doing that again.
Yeah.
Good luck selling that in a job interview, though. So why should we give you this job? Well, I know what not to do. So I got one last question for Chris, and then we'll let you get back to crunching your 2024 numbers. But you did something that I struggled to do in my career, which was successfully make the transition from top dog individual contributor to VP of sales, chief revenue officer, business executive. How were you able to do that? Because it was always hard for me where it's like, well, if I move you from your sales job that you're crushing to a management job, then I lose my best sales guy. How were you able to make that transition? And now, I mean, most people that meet you think of you as like a corporate executive, but I think of you still as a sales guy who made that transition.
That's an interesting question. And that's one that we struggle with from time to time. I think it's also one of the biggest risks organizations have. The natural thing is to look at your top performers and say, they should lead. That's not always the case, and not everybody wants to lead. And I think what we've seen is their sales. I think you got to ask people why do you want to be in leadership? What I've typically seen, and I see this across industries. I've talked to other CROs and sales leaders. There's a lot of reps that want it because of a title, or they want it.
Yeah.
Sales professionals have to have a little bit of a stronger ego. They just do.
Yeah.
And I think we all do. And because it's that will to win, it's that competitive nature, and, to go out and compete, right? So you got to have a little bit of, tenacity and swagger. Oftentimes, that leads reps to want to take on a role for the wrong reasons. And they take on that role because they want the title, or they want the authority, or they want the compensation. And I think really what we try to coach to is you really should want to take it on because your job is to serve them. And there's actually a great book, and I love it. And I like all of our leaders to read it. And it's called The Servant by James Hunter. And it's all about servant leadership. I don't do this great all the time, but it's an ideal that I aspire to. Is you should want to get into leadership because you're wanting to serve others, not because of what you're trying to do. I think people have asked me, like, how have you how did you get to become the CRO? Sometimes I have to look back and like map it out, and I just did what the organization needed, because I actually took a step back. Chase remembers this. I went from SVP of North American Sales to I actually ran a much smaller piece of the organization. And I have to look back, and at a time we actually had a CRO leave, and I had to be okay that I wasn't tapped for that role. And it wasn't the right role for me at that time. Like that, it wasn't. And I think looking back, I maybe wanted it for the wrong reasons. I actually took a smaller role and then started working on, I had a great conversation with Jeff Hughes, and it really resonates with me. And I try to do that with our leaders. And he said, what do you want to do? Like, what do you want to do in your career? Not just right now. And we were able to really unpack that. And really what I wanted to do was lead cross-functional teams, which led me to more acquisition integration, which ultimately led me to the general manager role of business automation. And to date, I love that role. Like it was one of the best. And Jeff told me, I remember he said, it's going to be one of the best roles you ever had. He was the GM at NCR. And he was right. It's actually to today, it may probably right up there with the current role that I'm in. And then was asked to basically go take on the CRO role, which in large part is doing a lot of what I did as a GM, because I'm working across departments of, collaborating with product, collaborating with marketing, and collaborating with development, really so we can achieve our goals and our strategy. But if I bring it all the way back, Jeremy, you've got to be able to, I think, sometimes take a step back, take lesser roles, and be focused on how am I providing more value to the organization that I'm with, and then trusting your leadership over the long haul. But if I would have just left and said, oh, you didn't select me for that role, who knows where I'd be right now, And so I think sometimes you got to get back to that humbleness and say, hey, you got to take some ups and you take some downs, and the downs aren't actually downs when you look at it in the long term. It's actually it's taking you to the path that I think ultimately you're really designed to be in, and you're learning along the way. So I don't know if I answered that question or
Oh
not.
yeah. No, that's that's awesome. Chase, any final thoughts before we sign off?
No, well, yes, I really like that last piece. I think if you're young in your career, you're aspiring to leadership. I think there was a lot of wisdom in what Chris just said. A couple points. The first being, good salespeople don't always make good sales leaders. And if you want to get into sales leaders, ask yourself why, or sales leadership, ask yourselves why, because it's a different game. And you got to find joy from a kind of a different piece of it. You're not the superstar winning the deals anymore. And you got to be okay with that. You got to enjoy watching other people do that. But I think the other piece, I'm thinking of my own career as Chris tells this story about, I left Drilling Info and I went to another organization. It turned out to be a huge miss for me. Learned a ton, grew the organization. There was a lot going on, and ultimately it wasn't as successful as I would have hoped when I joined. But I look back on that now. I live in a part of the world that I love, doing what I love. And none of that would have ever happened had I not taken that miss. And I think it's important to take a step back and look at the whole thing and go, hey, that 2 years or that however long it is for your career didn't pan out the way I wanted. But I wouldn't be where I am today. And I had to take valuable lessons from that. And so I think there's a ton of wisdom in those comments, Dinkler. And it's one of those things, unfortunately, that you really don't see it until later on in your career. When you're early on, it's hard to have that perspective. You just haven't seen enough cycles.
Right.
But yeah, man, you gotta look at the long game. It's so important. So I appreciate Chris, you sharing that.
Sure thing.
Well, I appreciate both you guys coming on. This is one of my favorite podcasts ever. I'm not just saying that, it's true. I love when we can pass on fundamental lessons to salespeople, but the truth is, you just have to experience it yourself, right? I think all of us have, and all of us continue to in our journey of our lives and our careers. So happy holidays to everyone. Hanukkah for me, Christmas for you guys, but spend time with your family. That's what it's all about.
Well, hey, Jeremy, thanks for having me on. It's great to be with you and Chase, and congratulations on your success, man. It's been fun watching you. And so I've kind of secretly watched some of these podcasts. I'm like, man, maybe one day I'll get on there with Jeremy. But yet, like I told you before, podcasts aren't necessarily my thing. But if I was ever going to do something, I'm so glad it was with you. And congratulations, man. And Chase, to you as well. Tell Carly we said hi. Julie said hi. And happy holidays to everybody.
Yeah, man. Y'all take care.
Bye.